I founded not for long, about 5 months ago, with a couple other people in the advertising and marketing world. And what we set out to do at the time was very much keep small businesses alive that were struggling with struggling with all sorts of business problems as an impact of COVID, but specifically helping them address a lot of their social and digital marketing issues, I suppose, and helping them pivot their business so that they weren't one of these 1 in 5 businesses that might go under during the pandemic. We worked on a sort of bespoke basis with a lot of businesses and one-to-one across like the whole range of creative marketing disciplines, so social media marketing, content marketing, SEO, CRM, a whole suite of the fundamentals of marketing. But as well as doing that, we decided to set up these sort of webinars and workshops, and specifically handbooks, which Alice is going to take you through, that focus on these fundamentals and sort of try and chunk them up and give you a sort of base level understanding or a bit of a framework to take your marketing to the next level in those aspects. So the one that we're going through today is content strategy. We also had a social media marketing one that we did earlier this week with the SSE. But both will be available for download, or Helen will be able to email that to the participants. And later on in the month, we'll have a whole suite of them available. So covering everything from CRM to SEO to paid media, etc., etc. We hope they're sort of a valuable resource, which helps us reach a wider amount of businesses than we can on sort of a one-to-one basis. So yeah, I'll pass on to Alice, who's going to go through it. Like I said, they're sort of designed as handbooks. So don't worry if you're thinking there's too much information on a slide or you missed some of the information, because you will have the handbook separately. But the purpose of this is to have our expert who helped put it together sort of take you through it, and then there's a chance to sort of ask Alice and I any questions that you might have off the back of that.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, really excited to have you guys back with us today. As Dan said, I will email the resource out to you all afterwards, so you will get access to that by email, and you'll get a recording to this session by email again. Now, just a reminder, please stay on mute and do direct any questions that you have into the chat function, and I'll either find a suitable place to put those to our panel, or I'll collate them and ask them at the end. So Alice, hello and welcome. If you'd like to share your screen.
Amazing, thank you. Can you confirm that you can see it?
Yeah, perfect, Alice, thanks.
Amazing, 1 second. Perfect, so thanks for the intro. A little bit of background on me. So day to day, I'm a strategist at a small creative agency called Clubhouse Studios in London. And our clients include some like big global clients such as Adidas and Polaroid Originals, but I also support some small businesses which are super varied, from like education to furniture to travel. So welcome to this webinar, where I'll be talking today about content strategy, what it is and how to approach it. And as Dan said, this handbook will be available for you following this webinar, and it's designed as a handbook to read. So there's some exercises and questions for you to work through in your own time. But hopefully the aim of today is to provide an overview of some of the most important elements that contribute towards developing your own content strategy. And then following this, you'll be able to work through the process to establish what content will work best for your brand or business. So let's start at the beginning with what is content strategy. And it's a term that's kind of been thrown around a lot within marketing, but ultimately it encompasses creating and distributing content. So this can be any type of content, from images to videos or writing, and it can be shared via social media or blog posts or CRM, email newsletters. But during this session, we'll mainly be referring to content primarily within the realms of social media. And so the purpose of a content strategy is really to ensure that everything you put out to your audience is valuable, relevant and consistent, so that you can attract a clear audience. So that's cool, but why do you actually need a content strategy? As I'm sure you're all aware, there's like a ton of stuff online, and we could all like sit and scroll through it on our phones or on Google forever, really. And just on YouTube alone, 300 hours of video is uploaded to the platform every minute, to just give an indication of how much stuff there is out there. So having a content strategy provides a structure to help make your content as engaging as possible for your audience. And then hopefully you can create stuff that they want to engage with, so they want to watch, read, or talk about. So with your content strategy, you're obviously aiming to connect with your audience. And when it's done well and successfully, you can motivate, educate, and connect with them both with your existing audience and your potential audience that you would like to expand to be able to reach. So creating this type of useful content for your platform can be a really low cost and effective method of increasing brand awareness and the amount of people that know about your brand. So actually there's a little fact here that 4 out of 5 customers end up with a positive view of a brand after learning about it via helpful content. So this just demonstrates how valuable it can be as a starting point for brand discovery. And finally, before we dig into things, it's important to remember that there isn't one single cookie cutter content strategy that's guaranteed to have success for your business. It will really vary depending on the type of service that you offer and what you want to achieve, and also your customers. So some aspects of the content strategy that I go through might be more applicable to you than others. And that's cool. You can decide where you want to focus your efforts. Having said that, the questions outlined in the slides that we go through shortly kind of give an overview of the topics that you should give some consideration to make sure that you are viewing content strategy as kind of overall big picture. So what you'll see here is that content strategy is a cycle, and sadly it's not a case of rushing through it and forgetting about it. Once you get to the end, you kind of go again, and it's a continual and evolving loop. So admittedly, the first time you go through it, it will probably require the most amount of thinking and time, but don't be worried about nailing it the first time, because it is this ongoing process that's being constantly refined and requires some experimentation. Okay, so let's get into things and start with step 1, which is all about setting your goals. So this is about establishing what you want to achieve, and these are called your content goals. So having these front of mind will help to plan and guide the type of material that's going to be most useful for your brand. These are likely to be informed by your brand values, combined with your overall marketing goals. And the more specific these goals, the better, because this allows you to really be able to adapt the content to suit these needs. So to have a really clear picture of these goals in your mind before you approach your content is really helpful. And I find writing them down so that you can return to them and check that everything you're doing contributes to these just helps you kind of stay accountable to your overall goals. So the kind of goals that we're talking about here are, do you want to increase brand awareness? Or maybe it's more about focusing on community engagement, or are you really concerned about increasing traffic to your website? And the type of questions you might ask yourself at this stage is what do you want your brand to be known for? And then next up, moving on to think about your audience. So as with any aspect of marketing, it's really important to have a clearly defined understanding of who you're talking to, and your customers are your audience. So it's likely that your audience will consist of several groups, and that's good, that's healthy, because everyone's unique, but their differences may be down to demographics, which are kind of age, gender, profession, or maybe it's more, they can be more broadly split into psychographics, which is like lifestyle, beliefs, values. But having a broad understanding of these segments will help to determine their needs and what style of content will be most relevant to each of them. So at this stage, you can ask yourself, who do you think your audience is? And also, it might differ to who you actually want your audience to be. So as your business continues to grow, what would your ideal target audience become. And a tip as a starting point is having a look at your social data. So if you have a business page on Instagram, Facebook or Twitter, you can go to the insights section and you'll be able to see a rough audience breakdown based on kind of gender, age and location, which is obviously very top line, but this can give you a broad understanding of who you're talking to. So once you've got a clear idea on your kind of goals and audience, it's time to conduct an audit on the content that you've created so far, to look at which posts performed well and which ones didn't perform so well. So a simple way of calculating this is to just compare the total number of engagements on each post. You might also want to consider the reach, which is how many of your followers actually saw the content. And again, each social media platform can provide data on either the individual posts or the overall page analytics. And one thing to remember at this stage is obviously like your audience have chosen to follow your brand for a reason. So the ultimate aim is to keep them as interested as possible. And to do so, you need to create unique content that reflects who you are as a brand. When you're looking at your content, look to see if there are any recurring themes between what performs best and what doesn't work so well. For instance, are the images that performed best like showing your product or your service in a really like beautiful way, and maybe the ones that don't perform well are kind of like low quality images that are repurposed from other places. And then at this stage, you might also want to think about whether there's anything that you've noticed might be missing, and any content opportunities that might occur there. So let's take a look at a case study, which is Grind Coffee, which is based in London. And we can use this as an example of how to approach this content audit that I've been discussing. So to get a quick overview, if I were to visit their Instagram page, I'd scroll through and see how many people have liked each post. Obviously, the higher the better. And whilst this is a really top line way of looking at things, and it doesn't take into account the algorithms and how many people might have actually seen the post, it does provide an indication of the best performing content. So in this case, the best performing content was a competition in partnership with another brand. And this is a really common tactic that's used to help boost reach and engagement, especially amongst new audiences. So if the brand also aligns with yours and you think there might be audience that you can gain from partnering with them, this is a good tactic. And then the other piece of content that performed well is this high quality piece of user generated content. We call this UGC, but it's basically an image a customer has shared and tagged your brand in on behalf of your brand. And then on the flip side of things, here are the two examples of content that didn't perform so well. There might be no like rhyme or reason as to this, but from observations, they're less polished than the usual style of content that they've shared, and like the example on the previous page, and neither make the coffee look as appealing. And also there's no reference to the brand, so this could come from any coffee shop. It's not unique to Grind. So now we'll zoom out a bit and think about curating your content. So rather than approaching content on a piece-by-piece basis, it helps to think of it like a jigsaw, where each individual piece should have its own purpose and contribute to the overall picture. And then within this, you can cluster groups together to form content themes. These are a subset of topics that will contribute towards your overall content strategy. And the benefit of defining content themes has several benefits. So firstly, organization. It really helps to ensure that your content covers all the necessary topics that you want to talk about within your brand. Secondly, targeting. So having defined themes can help to guide specific content for specific groups of people. And lastly, ideation. So this is the part that a lot of people find tricky. However, by ideation, I mean like actually thinking about what you want to post and creating the content. However, setting content themes helps to refine relevant topics, so at least you've kind of identified the buckets in which you're going to create your posts. So at this stage, some questions to consider would be, ultimately, what are you asking your audience to do? Perhaps you're aiming to educate or entertain or attract or advertise. And then when you're planning your topics, keep asking yourself if it's possible for every piece of content to be useful and relevant. So here's another case study, this time from Proper, the popcorn brand, to demonstrate the clear and consistent content themes that they've got in play on their Instagram. So you can see campaign and product imagery, and this is where they'll probably be more sales focused. And then you've got the user generated content pillar, which is where they reshare images and content of their customers enjoying their product. And then you've got recipe inspiration, which is slightly more creative and unique and shows the product being showcased in kind of different environments, like made into food. And then lastly is the reactive and seasonal pillar. And this is where they've kind of looked at what they think their audience might be interested or talking about and created content off the back of that. So for example, you've got some Christmas content and another post to do with Glastonbury. Having these themes really allows them to plan and organise content that's relevant for their audience throughout the year. And it also gives them enough variation in terms of the types of content they create, so it's not just product. So this is a stage that a lot of people are keen to dive straight into, which is creating the content. But now you've seen how much prep you should do before you even get to this stage. So when it comes to creating content, there are a variety of options. So these can be broadly split into the content that you create for your audience, and this is known as owned content. This can include videos, images, infographics, case studies, to name a few. And owned content helps to promote your brand, helping to build trust and relationships with your audience. And then alongside that, there's also earned content, which you can integrate within your strategy. And this is all the content and conversation around your brand that's shared by somebody else on your behalf. So user generated content, which we've already mentioned, falls into this category. And also if you have any positive reviews or images that customers have taken featuring your product, this can be really valuable content to reshare, and this would also fall under earned content. And just a note, don't underestimate the power of word of mouth marketing. So 74% of customers consider word of mouth to be the key influencer in their purchasing decisions. And I think increasingly people are trusting people more than brands. So if you do have any brand advocates that you can identify, this would be like a really great opportunity to reshare the positive things they've got to say. And when you're thinking about content creation, think about what you've tried before, what has worked well, and also what kind of content does your target audience typically engage with. Right, so we're making our way through this, and next is stage 6, which is planning your content. So thinking beyond the types of content to create, you also need to consider how to organize this content. Don't worry too much about sharing the same content across different social channels, but do try and make sure that it's optimized for each of the platforms. I know like LinkedIn and Twitter would have different image sizes, so just make sure that you are using the right size images so that you don't have any parts of it weirdly cropped. And you can learn more about this and the optimum kind of content in our social media marketing handbook, which is also available. Also, it's worth mentioning here that there's no golden rule to the frequency of posting. If anything, consistency and quality is more important than quantity. So definitely plan for a maintainable amount that you can sustain over time. And another tip here is that the majority of social platforms do allow you to schedule your posts in advance if you prefer to kind of sit down and spend some time to schedule them for the whole week, then that can be helpful. And then on this slide, we've created a template, and basically creating a content calendar is a helpful method of managing your content because it allows you to gain a big picture approach to your content planning and see how all your content will work across the month. So your content calendar will be a hub for everything you post, and be useful to visualize how all of your ideas will fit together. Once you've got this handbook, you can follow the link where it says download here and access this template and work through and create your own content calendar. Just make sure you duplicate it before you start filling it in. Otherwise, everyone will be deleting each other's content. And then following all the planning, it's finally time to post and distribute your content. And ideally, of course, you want as many people to see it as possible. So recognizing when your audience is online and active will help to maximize the reach of the content. Hashtags can also be used to help reach a wider audience who are searching via a specific interest or trend. However, make sure to use hashtags selectively. And also it's worth doing some research to see which hashtags and communities are most active and authentic to your service. Finally, if it's applicable, you could collaborate with other brands or media partners. You can do this either by exchanging value, for instance, by reposting each other's content, or perhaps paying to feature on a channel that has a larger reach than your own. And this can help build credibility and brand discovery. Or alternatively, do you have any loyal customers or brand advocates who would share your content on their channel to help increase the reach? That could be another kind of low cost approach to distributing your content. So this is the stage where people often tap out, but it's really important not to be overlooked. And the last step is towards an effective content strategy is measuring the results of your efforts. So tracking and analysing what's working and what's not on a regular, I usually say monthly basis, will help to inform planning for the next month. And don't be afraid to make tweaks and adjustments to see how they perform. Most of the social platforms have analytics built into the platform, which cover most of the base metrics that you might want to track. So for example, engagement, reach, new followers, or follower growth. And then if you want to go a step further, there are paid planning and tracking tools like Sprout Social, which can provide deeper measurement and reporting if you need to get into that. So there you have it, like a whistle-stop overview of content strategy and how to approach it. But just to reiterate, it's a cycle. So once you get to stage 8, don't sit back and relax for too long, and make sure you regularly revisit the whole cycle. And then just before we wrap up, here are a couple of final tips. So consistency is key, both visually and tonally. This will help to strengthen your brand identity and really differentiate you from your competitors. And then think about how you can use storytelling to engage and communicate with your audience. So what are the other aspects that you can talk about aside from just kind of commercial content? And then thirdly, make your content work hard for you. So optimize content by considering post timings and include relevant hashtags to increase discovery, as we discussed. And then the next one is be reactive and relevant. Obviously, a content calendar is great for planning, but don't be too rigid about it and let that stop you or overlook new opportunities that you might have to create content that latches onto cultural trends or moments, as long as it's relevant or authentic to your brand. And when looking at the content calendar, it's often helpful to look at like a general marketing calendar or like cultural events that might be occurring throughout the year, so that you can plan content around Christmas and Halloween or those kind of occasions. And finally, always measure the results. So content strategy requires an ongoing test and learn approach, so make sure that you're constantly applying these learnings and revisiting. So that brings us to the end of our webinar, and then as Dan mentioned at the beginning, there'll be other not for long handbooks that are available in the upcoming weeks that address some of the other aspects of marketing. But now I think we have a little time for questions, so feel free to drop them in the chat.
Thanks, Alice. Yeah, we've had a number of questions and they started to ramp up actually. So can we kick off on the question around measurement first of all?
Yeah.
Just trying to understand which elements, what do you measure? This was a question from Sophia. So how can measurement of reach help you better understand how well your content is doing versus engagement? And she cites the example. So what if she's built up reach for her post, but then is generating very limited engagement?
Yeah, I think both of them are valuable metrics. It depends what you want to achieve. So if your objective is brand awareness, you'll be more concerned with the reach of the post. Whereas if you are more concerned about building like a community and brand loyalty, you would probably look more towards the engagement. And there's definitely like a sweet spot in trying to achieve both of them. But that's what kind of the whole content strategy is about. If you have been able to identify the purpose of what you want that specific post to achieve, then that should determine which metrics are most valuable for that post.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. And then Danny has asked, are there any preferred or best performing platforms that engage audiences who value purpose and social enterprise? Any thoughts on tackling?
That's a good question. I'd say each platform probably could deliver on that, but it's more about building a community and making sure that the people that follow you obviously align with the purpose. And I think there's tactics that you can use on each of the platforms to try and strengthen that. So you can create the educational content that explains to your followers why the purpose is so important, and maybe create kind of spaces and stuff for them to have the conversation with you. Dan, is there anything you want to add on that?
I was just going to jump in that as well, because it's actually a really interesting question that from when I first spoke to Helen and from first sort of delving into the world of social enterprises, I've sort of been thinking about since. And I think the way to look at it, again, like you should with all social media platforms, and the first handbook that we had that does the fundamentals of social media marketing should really help with this, is look at what audience is on what platform, rather than, there isn't a social enterprise, social platform, for instance, with people who are into certain social issues. The fact of the matter is that all of the platforms have loads of people who are interested in social issues. What you need to do is define who that audience is. Who do you think your core audience are interested in particular social issues? Like, I'm just off the top of my head, if maybe you're looking at an issue that's to do with the environment, and you realise that a particular issue to do with the environment in your local area, and you realise that skews a bit older, you might end up being on Facebook, for instance. Or if who you're talking to is for instance, as a social enterprise, you're both reaching sort of beneficiaries of your product, those that you're selling the product to, and then also those who may invest in your social enterprise, or those who from a business perspective might be interested in your social cause. LinkedIn might be the perfect platform, B2B for instance, and a lot more I guess professionals on there. So it's really looking at the different audiences for the different content that you want to put out there, and that social media marketing playbook, like I said, has like a nice table that sort of lays out the key demographics for those different platforms, and then being on those platforms to target those people. Yeah, hopefully that sort of answers the question, and that will send out that handbook as well, so you can have a look at that sort of information.
Yeah, thanks guys. Yeah, I think your social mission is your secret sauce, right? It's your reason why anybody should care about what you do, and becomes part of that storytelling. So I think about it that way, how it feeds into your content and how you engage your audiences, rather than trying to think about it from that platform perspective. And I think quite a lot of social entrepreneurs disregard LinkedIn, for example, thinking that it's B2B and professional, and their beneficiaries don't necessarily hang out on LinkedIn. But I think as social entrepreneurs, we have many different audiences that we need to speak to. So those kind of large kind of corporates, kind of funders, kind of large third sector organizations, you will find many of them on LinkedIn also. So it's worth doing that, kind of thinking about all your audiences and thinking about what they're interested in, and then kind of what's that sweet spot, how does that marry with what you can with what you can share. This notion of storytelling, Alice, could you just go on to explain, when you use the term storytelling, what do you mean by it? How do you want people to behave? What are you suggesting with the word storytelling?
Yeah, sure. So storytelling can take like loads and loads of different forms, and basically it's anything that you talk about that isn't like directly commercial. So I'd say it's often helpful to like think about the different kind of threads that might sit around your product or service or brand, that could relate and be interesting to consumers to kind of engage, or your followers to engage with them on a deeper level. So it might be from, like, you want to tell the story about how your business started, and it's basically just like thinking of trying to divide that into like different chapters of like how to communicate the story best.
Yeah, 100%. I just echo on from that if you look at wider marketing, if you're a business marketing yourself, usually your communication will split into two buckets. So you'll have emotional and rational. Rational is like you'd pass, Tesco's or Sainsbury's, or you get served an advert where it says these bananas are 50% off, buy them now. And then emotional storytelling is a lot more like your Waitrose ad at Christmas, where they're not specifically selling you an individual product, but they're telling you a story about their brand. They're saying, if you come to Waitrose, this is the sort of person you are. This is the sort of brand that we are. These are the values that we hold. So it's exactly the same on social media. The content that you put out there, if it's from an emotional standpoint, you'll be telling a story about your brand, whether that's where your brand comes from, whether that's the story that goes behind your products. And I think particularly for social enterprises, like Helen said, your social cause is really powerful, and that is something that you can tell a story around for sure. Like there's loads of stories you can tell around, not only the product that's there, but where it comes from, who it's benefiting, who's really supporting the cause. Like it's like an extra edge to your sword, I'd say.
Thanks both. Sophia's popped a question in around user-generated content that I think we've covered in chat. So Sophia, if I don't know if you've seen that, Dan, if you have anything else to add. So her question was around, in terms of that user-generated content piece, what's the GDPR aspect? Just anything to bear in mind if you're looking to pick up user-generated content and then share that across your social media channels, just in terms of permissions needed and so on.
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one, Alice. We got this on a previous webinar. To be honest, the safest way always is to ask for permission. You wherever you find that picture, assuming if it's user generated content, you've probably found it on someone else's account, send them a DM, say, excuse me, do you mind if I use this? Give the reason for why you're using it. Always the best way to go about it. You don't want to get into a situation where you post a bit of content without permission, and it ends up sort of getting you into a legal battle over an Instagram post or whatever that might be. That said, of course, there are people out there who might post it without permission. They might get away with it if you're a small enough brand or business. But I think if you're a brand or business, you should always be operating on the notion that you're asking for permission. In terms of GDPR specifically, I don't think you need to get them to sign anything necessarily. Just their sort of written permission in a message is usually fine. When it goes into getting images, so for instance, there's we got a question that's around like stock imagery. Or using like photographer's imagery. In that case, you really do need to make sure like it's written in Word that you're allowed to use it, or you've paid for the rights to use that image. If you want to get rights-free imagery, there's a great website that I use a lot for presentations and posts and stuff like that called unsplash.com. All of the images on there are really beautiful, really, really well done, and they're all rights-free. And you'll find anything relevant to your brand from, if you type in like fishing to horticulture or whatever in there, they've got like a whole bank of imagery. So if you're looking for somewhere to get rights-free imagery, not necessarily user-generated content, then that's a place to go.
Thanks. So Rose has asked a question around the content calendar, and I can't kind of reiterate enough how valuable putting that time in up front into having a content calendar, just to really help focus and drive what you do. Now her question is just that sometimes like that content's only available at the last minute, and her question is around how to encourage third parties to share this content in advance. Now I know you started to cover that, and really it kind of plays on that. Well, it's a word I can't say. Help me out. Reciprocity.
Yeah.
So essentially, if you are generous in the content that you share of influencers that you admire, or people that you ultimately want to share on your content, if you are generous and start off that way, and it will have relevance to your audience because they're in the similar field, then they will take the hit, they'll take the hint and share also, has been my experience. But guys, any other tips on how to encourage that sharing and that from the third parties?
Yeah, it can be tricky, but I think, just building up that relationship is probably the most important thing. And I guess the difficulty is that you kind of want them to commit to it and know that you're going to get their support, and then suddenly they might have something else that they want to talk about, and so your content becomes like a lower priority for them. But I think sharing what you'd like them, or giving them an overview of what you'd like them to share on your behalf, with some warning, should help to kind of manage any clashes that they might have in their content calendar. And again, hopefully then it would work the same way, that they'll give you some warning before they suddenly post something and like, oh, can you reshare this today?
Yeah, and I agree. I'd echo that as well, and just say, I don't want to call it influencer marketing, because I like to call it partnership marketing, I guess, especially when you're at like a micro level, you've got like 5,000 or so followers on Instagram or less. Just be quite blatant with it. Like, there's always ways of, I guess you compare it to sort of like flirting, I suppose. Like you said, you're posting, giving hints, posting content out there. But there is another way to go about it, and just be, treat it like a partnership. Find somebody who has like-minded values to your page, whether that's an influencer or another brand. Send them a message and say, hey, really like the sort of stuff that you're doing. I was going to share your brand on my page, and sort of shout you out. Would you be interested in doing the same and having a partnership or collaboration, and just make it as black and white as that. Mm-hmm. You'd be surprised, because if it's somebody who's around the same size as you in terms of followers, they will be more than happy to share your audience, especially if you put it to them like that. And that's the goal of doing it.
Thanks, Dan. I like your use of the word flirting, because I think content marketing really is a good way to think about it. A good analogy is that developing, kind of starting a relationship piece. So, you kind of meeting for the first time, and you really don't want to be that person that you meet for the first time, having looked at each other's profile, and then all you do is talk about yourself. So I think that relationship piece is a really nice way to think about it, and how you behave and how generous you are and so on. And actually Nicole's asked a kind of a linking question. So how do you authentically encourage people to engage? And so kind of just driving that comments and that share, so that you're starting to kind of beat that algorithm and so on. So how authentically do you encourage people to engage with your content?
I'd say where possible, try and start a conversation with them. Like there are some like dirty tactics that some brands use, like, you know, tag someone, or like a lot of people do like giveaways and stuff. But I think if you can ask a question or try and start a conversation in an authentic way, then that's going to provide the most real and authentic engagement for them. Like you need, ultimately, you're only going to get that on posts that people care about. So you need to really plan your content with purpose and relevance. And then hopefully that will be a byproduct.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you're just trying to get the vanity numbers, then you can do something that's like, and it is also useful as well for gaining followers in the early stages, but you can do a sort of competition where it's like, you know, tag 2 friends and follow this account to win, etc., etc. And that's a particularly pertinent sort of like influence marketing technique, and it does work, and it can build you up a followership, and they might be followers who do stay on for a while if you're also posting relevant content from then on once they follow you. But I guess the most the organic way and the hard way of doing things is, like Alice said, using relevant hashtags in your content, for looking at like-minded influencers or accounts and commenting on their content with sort of like questions, I suppose, or like actual genuine interest, etc., etc., sort of like driving that engagement, looking at sort of things on the Discover page that are in sort of your community or in the sort of location that you would be in, and trying to engage with those posts. It's exactly the same as building relationships in the real world. It's you know, networking, going out there, talking to people, leaving a nice message, etc., etc.
Yeah, and I think what you started to bring in there, Dan, is that other piece around how you sound as well. So, you know, ultimately people like to respond and feel like they're talking to people. And I think the mistake that kind of new business owners can fall into is feeling like they have to sound professional or formal and sound like a business. It's kind of like when I wrote letters to my solicitor when I was buying a house, like, well, I hereby would like to inform you that, you know, that there's lots of language there that you don't need and is very impersonal. So always think about a very, very kind of narrow audience, or even try and think about them as a single person and then write copy that will engage them and is conversational. Sophie, I've completely lost track of any new questions coming in. Are there any more that you can help with? I think we've got just a couple of minutes left for a final couple of questions. Is there any other questions in a different theme that I've missed? Sorry to throw that on you.
No worries, I'm just having a look. Danny's asked if there's any good analytic tools outside of the social media platforms themselves.
Alice, you want to take this one?
Pulls things together.
I'm not fully up to date with all the latest tools, but I know Hootsuite provides some analytics, what do you call it, like information and insights. Dan, do you know any of the other ones?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to, again, in that social media marketing deck that we have, there's, we've suggested Sprout Social. I think for analytics, Sprout Social is good. You do, of course, have to pay for them. If you want to get one of the best in the actual platform, you're going to have to pay. But if that guy for a small business that has, you know, say, what would, like, you know, 1 or 2 employees, if you're like a sole trader, especially if you're only managing 1 or 2 accounts. I know when you're, for instance, if you're like managing accounts, then the price starts to go up a bit higher because they know that sort of your livelihood depends on that. But if you're a small business, yeah, try and check out Sprout Social. They do like a monthly subscription. You might have to pay annually. I'm not 100% sure, but they've got good that bring in all the platforms. Yeah, check out.
Cool, thank you. I'm going to ask this one last question. It's actually a question that we tackled in Tuesday's webinar, but I think there's quite a mix of new people here, and it's around hashtags. And I mean, any tips for how you go about finding relevant hashtags? Just, you know, it's such an important piece, particularly on Instagram and Twitter. Any tips for how to use hashtags and where to find good ones that will really help grow?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one as well, because it's actually a question that we had, a question that we had a couple days ago on a different chat. I can actually put a link that's from Sprout Social, which is really helpful and sort of gives you the whole lowdown on hashtags and how both to find them organically, but also how to use tools to do that. I'm just going to bang it in the chat there. Yeah, but basically to sort of summarize that article and to go into it, yeah, there's like a quick and dirty way of finding the hashtags, which is using tools such as, I think it's just called like hashtag finder or something. It is called, give me 1 second, sorry. It's something called all hashtag it's called. So there's tools like that, all hashtag, and one called Keyhole. I'm not 100% sure if you have to pay for it or not, but you can basically type in a brand thing. So imagine you're a fitness instructor, you can type in fitness and it will come up with the best 300 hashtags that are associated with fitness on Instagram or Twitter or whatever that might be. The other way of doing it, which is probably the more organic and nicer way of doing it, is looking at pages that follow you that you would respect or have the same values as you, again, like influencers or brands, looking at the hashtags that they use and trying to copy their hashtags and basically share in their hashtags. I think that's probably the best way to go about it, but have a look on those sites and get the top performing ones as well. In terms of the number of hashtags you want to post, you probably only want to use like 3 to 6. You can use up to 30, but it's just not really best practice and makes the post look a bit messy. And what was the last one I was going to say? Effectively, God, what was I going to say? Yeah, effectively, I wouldn't always use the top performing hashtags, because if you imagine when someone goes on a Discover page and say you use hashtag love, there's so many different brands using that hashtag with a hell of a lot more followers than possibly your account. So you're not really going to appear on that Discover page. It's going to be a lot harder to shout on that page. So sometimes you're better off going for something that's more specific to your brand, that has less attention on it, but might actually get people to eventually come to your page. So yeah, that's what I think.
Thanks. Yeah, and I guess the other thing I'd add on hashtags is to think about different types of hashtags that you can try. So that could be kind of location-based hashtags. It could be like content-based hashtags. So what's the main subject of your kind of mini blog post about? It could be audience-based hashtags. It could be you know, you get the like theme of the day and things like that. So try and think about very niche hashtags and then slightly broader hashtags. Try and get a variety, and then copy and paste them. I save mine in a Word document on my desktop, and then tweak them slightly as I go along, so I can test them and see which ones are driving different impacts for me. But again, it's really quick and easy to do. So once you've built up your base of hashtags, you can start to tweak and refine them, and it will evolve over time. So it's a constant process. Yeah. So I'm conscious of time. Can we just wrap up by going just to Alice and Dan? And if you could just share just what's your kind of one nugget that people can take away, just kind of a top tip for creating effective content, just a really small kind of top tip, your kind of top nugget people can take away. Alice, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure. I'd say don't be scared to try new things. At the end of the day, it's like a post that's out there amongst a lot of other things, and if it really crashes and burns, you can delete it, but also it's all part of like an experimentation program kind of process where you have to see like what's working and what's not working.
Thanks. Dan?
Yeah, I think mine is probably more about the mechanic rather than the actual content itself, but the mechanics of content strategy. I think, like I said, don't be afraid to reach out to like-minded people within your audience, partner with them, and try and co-create content, because I'm a big advocate for it, especially since sort of working with a lot of small businesses. All of you guys, especially in the social enterprise as well, there's so many like-minded people. There's so many people that if you can sort of share your audience, you can actually grow the category together. And I think that's no different within content. You know, if say you're a social enterprise that focuses on, getting disadvantaged kids into certain industries and within the local community, and one of you's based in Scotland, one of you's based in London, one of you's based in Leeds, etc. You all have effectively the same goal, but just different local areas. And if you've all got 10,000 followers each, if you sort of share content and share each other's mission, you're just going to grow exponentially. So I think that's less a question about the specific content itself, but more about the strategy of getting it out there to people.
Yeah, really powerful. Yeah, I'm kind of echo that piece around collaboration, particularly at the moment, and we're seeing a lot of it starting to happen, but really worth kind of digging around and being open to that as well. Thank you both so much for being here for the last couple of sessions, really powerful. So as I said, the session's been recorded. We'll share a link to it afterwards. We'll also give you access to the playbook as well that you can download. So I'll share that by email once that recording is prepared and has gone live. So worst case scenario, that will be tomorrow. But thank you all for being here. And then we'll also send a link to the general Recover and Rebuild page as well, so you can access the rest of the webinars